Hi everyone, it's been ages since I last hopped on here and recorded a video for you. So today I wanted to chat very quickly about the topic of evolution of covens. And I'll also make a separate video where I'll be talking about the evolution of traditions. Now, this is a fairly short video, but before I lurch into talking about how and perhaps why covens evolve, let me briefly talk about how covens typically function, or what the typical functioning of a coven would look like in terms of numbers and roles and so on. Now, typically, and I say typically here, but please keep in mind that there are many variations on the theme. So typically, a traditional coven, or at least one that is in our specific tradition line, is run by a person who takes the role of a high priestess and someone who takes the role of a high priest. Sometimes, depending on the specific situation, a coven is only run by a high priestess or a high priest. Now, regardless, these coven leaders are valid initiates and members of the high priesthood. A coven can have any number of people, usually up until around the number 12, sometimes 13, but they can always have slightly more or slightly less at any given time. The amount of people in a coven is variable and it depends on the coven itself. So, for example, some covens purposefully choose to remain on the sort of smaller end of things, and they would have roughly 4 to 8 members. Typically, though, teaching covens have the greatest sort of fluctuation in terms of numbers, although the core group will often remain constant. So in this particular teaching coven scenario, the members of the high priesthood will remain constant and usually a small core group. And then as people are trained, perhaps if they choose to hive off and start their own covens, they may take some people in the current coven with them to hive off, or they might actually even start entirely new covens. And so you can see that the number of people in a coven is going to be in flux over a number of years. So as people hive off, obviously the coven numbers change. Now, in the sacred pentagraph tradition, the number that was suggested for a coven size or a typical coven size was 12. That includes the high priest and the high priestess, and there were also specific suggestions of coven roles that could be applied within that coven. But that's sort of an idealized circumstance, and that doesn't always work 100% that way. So in reality, it's perhaps important to realize that covens as entities are not stagnant. They evolve and they change over time as well. And I think social media and other sources sometimes imagine that covens stay the same. But in reality, they don't, and they can't really be expected to. You know, it reminded me of one of the precepts of the sacred pentagraph tradition, that is a very general law that states that change is the only thing that abides, and that the secret to success is knowing how to adapt as things change. So it's important to know that many of our covens are also very heavily focused on working as a harmony, or the harmonious working of a coven. And so it also reminded me of a conversation I had with a fellow member of the high priesthood a little while ago, when we were talking, and they said we in our traditions are more concerned with quality over quantity. So the exact number in a coven is less important than harmony and the harmonious relationships within a coven. Now, if a coven finds that it can no longer work as a harmonious whole, we would look to guidance of our religious precepts. And one of those precepts states that we must adapt because things must flow with life. One must adapt to conditions and not oppose what cannot be changed, but change the things that can be. So if some members of a coven cannot function in harmony anymore, that's totally okay. And it's okay to admit this. And it's okay to split the coven so that harmony can once again be found. Now, fortunately, I can say that even though this doesn't happen a whole lot. And sometimes when this happens, we may feel a little bit sad, but we still love and appreciate each other, and we continue to be friends and care for each other. We are very fortunate in our tradition, I would say, that we tend to not have that much drama when things like this happen. So that helps because a precedent has been set within our traditions where we know and understand that part of our very foundational understanding of how things works, which informs us, is that we must adapt, and that adaptation does not mean we need to chuck friendships because we cannot work harmoniously together. It has also long been my own personal understanding that you can love and deeply care for people, but that you might not always be able to work harmoniously with them. And this is also okay because we're just human still. There's enough space for everybody to be able to work to fulfillment or work for fulfillment. And everybody is always working on their own stuff at any given time. There are numerous reasons why covens change and evolve in terms of membership. Harmonious working relationships is but one of those things that I just mentioned. Now, there are also other reasons. They may include things like where teaching covens and the membership varies quite a bit across a few years. And this is often because these covens are also focused on training people. Now, whether the training is to add members to a fairly newly established coven, or if the goal is for those who have the aptitude, capability, and desire to successfully and eventually hive off and start covens of their own. So those are reasons often where the membership will vary. Aside from membership numbers, there are other reasons why covens may evolve, which can actually come from the interests of the coveners, or maybe even the interests of the high priesthood themselves. So the high priesthood may decide, or some members with a member of the high priesthood may decide that they are going to hive and move on to running their own coven independently because they would like to focus on different areas of interest or focus. Now, here it might be important to sort of note that even though in our religion and our traditions, the tradition and religion sort of remains more or less constant in terms of the Sabbaths, the initiation rituals themselves. But the particular interests in terms of the types of things a coven wants to focus on as a group, or even the types of workings or forms of expression in SBAT, those may evolve over time. It may lead to some members of the coven doing different things. And they may decide to hive so that the harmony can be maintained with whatever they want to focus on and how that can be achieved. Now, by far, one of the most common things that affects membership is actually related to life circumstances because people move due to jobs, their careers, sometimes they have family commitments, retirement, and even death. Now, those things that I just mentioned are related to coven membership, as in the number of the people in the coven. But covens also evolve in other ways as well. This is a natural progression of covens because change and evolution, as I mentioned, are natural progressions. Coveners, or those that belong to a coven, will naturally change and grow over time. Sometimes, as part of a coven, what they want to do as part of a coven is going to be different from one year to the next, say, for example. And that's totally okay. It's a natural thing because sometimes we want to learn different things and we want to try different types of magical workings. And sometimes we may want to shift our focus. So, for example, some covens, or at least within our tradition, may want to become more elaborate in terms of how they decorate for SBATs, or they may want to decide to even add some additional coven gatherings per month where they can socialize with each other more, or where they can add some extra celebrations or playlets to their SBATs and Sabbaths that already exist. And they may want to add extra rituals to enhance or to get more experiences or variety. Or after many years of elaborate rituals, they may want to actually scale down. Some may want to focus actively on creating geographically relevant resources for their coven, or putting together coven resources on different topics that may change their focus as well. And some may want to focus on very specific mysteries within that group. These are all ways that covens can change and evolve over time, because covens are living entities, and hardly ever will you actually find a coven that is static. These are just a very few reasons that I could think of why covens would evolve. And one of the main things is the number of membership that will evolve. But again, some of the other issues or the other things that I mentioned would be focus of the coven. I hope you've learned something interesting in this video, and I look forward to talking to you again when we discuss the evolution of traditions. To be.